This is the Talkin Bout the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 11 of the Talkin Bout the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Alec Lastly and Kyler Staley. I'm Drew Rosenberg. Guys, how you doing, Alec? How's it going?
It's going well. Obviously, starting to get in the midst of college basketball season here in full swing. We got Big Ten play coming up, so exciting times all around. Obviously, on both ends of the spectrum with obviously college basketball and college football.
Kyler, how are you?
I'm going to kind of echo that. I'm going to kind of echo that. Sorry, I jumped your gun there, right there, Drew. But it's a fun time. December basketball's here, so you like Alex said, we've got 2 games of Big Ten coming up, and then we get back to non-con, and we got a couple of key non-con games with Kansas and Auburn coming up as well. So you hope Indiana's going to kind of finish out this calendar year strong and everything. But with all the IU football stuff going on too and everything, it's been an exciting week. I think for Indiana fans and stuff. So it's a busy time, but it's a fun time. Also throw in the fact that high school basketball started for me. So I'm loving that and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the news. Obviously, Tom Allen got fired. Probably will have a new coaching hire relatively soon. So when that kind of comes out, we'll have all the info. We'll probably have a emergency podcast for that when it happens. But I think we're just going to stick with basketball today. And the last time we talked, it was right before the Empire Classic. Since then, we've seen the team go 2-1, wins over Louisville and Harvard with a blowout loss to UConn. Alec, what have been your takeaways from the last 3 games?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was exactly kind of what I thought it would be like going into New York, right? I mean, struggled against 3 opponents that were clearly just not as good as what the caliber Indiana was about to play. And you saw that right away with UConn. I mean, obviously UConn is in a different tier than Indiana to begin with, but you could clearly tell within, 10, 15 minutes of that game that it was going to be a slugfest, and we were going to learn a lot about Indiana relatively quickly in that one. And they just were not able to roll with the punches, not able to kind of show the toughness that they needed, and once again, not able to shoot the ball from the perimeter. They did a better job at times defending the 3, but I think part of that was just due to the fact that UConn struggled to hit some wide open shots as well. And then obviously, you go into Louisville, and I think that was, a really disappointing performance, especially off of the quick turnaround from UConn. You would have liked to have seen a little bit more effort there and not have to force a zone defense to be able to get out of that one unscathed. And you go 1-1. Obviously, if you told a lot of Indiana fans you would go 1-1 going into the Empire Classic coming into this year, I think a lot of people would have taken that. But it was, I think, in the manner that that win and that loss came that still had a little bit of a disappointing taste in a lot of fans' mouths. And you go to Harvard, and I think that was by far the best performance that they had. Obviously took some time to get there, but that second half was probably the best 20 minutes that they put together all season long. And you hope that they can take some of that, especially in the half court offense and what they continue to do with the front court. Obviously the emergence of Mackenzie McBacco in that one, and bring that into Big Ten play. But yet again, the things that continue to really keep Indiana from elevating to a different level is shooting the 3, defending the 3, and not having the overall guard play that you're going to need in Big Ten play, especially from 2 upperclassmen. So still a lot of questions that have gone unanswered, I think, over the first month of the season, that they're going to really need to focus in on here coming up, especially on Friday, but then going on the road for that, really first true road test against Michigan as well next week.
Yeah, and I'm just going to kind of echo a lot of what Alex said again. I feel like I always do this on the pod, but going 1-1, I think it's perfectly fine for Indiana when it comes to the Empire Classic. And then obviously Alec did mention it. They played a lot better, especially in the second half versus Harvard. So my thing is with Indiana, even though they are squeaking out a lot of these wins that they've had, and they're not, playing to their full potential yet and everything. I do think each and every game they have shown some kind of improvement. I think for right now, we can obviously say the front court, that's the rock of this team. They're gonna go as they go right now, and there's obviously some questions, along the way with the perimeter defense and the guard play overall. But Indiana is just getting better, and they're starting to put the pieces together. I feel like, and you go back to the UConn game, yeah, the final score is not all that great looking at it on paper, but you got to remember throughout the game, Indiana, it was only about a 7 to 10 point kind of gap. Indiana was there. There were opportunities where Indiana could have made it closer, but obviously when you're going up against a very experienced team like UConn, a well-coached team like them, they're obviously going to figure out ways to just have that killer instinct. And right now, Indiana's still trying to figure out that instinct as well. You go back to the Louisville game, yeah, it was a little ugly at times and everything, but it comes down to know, Mike Woodson outcoached, Kenny Payne. He threw that zone at him and everything. And that's the type of things you want to see when you want a team that's going to win, even with a young, inexperienced team like Indiana. So the fact that they can, be coached up and that they can do the right things that Mike Woodson's asked of them to do, I think that's a big key right there. And then obviously at Harvard, the big breakout game with McKenzie and Baco that we have been waiting for, since the start of the season and everything. So you hope moving forward, that's going to build his confidence. That's going to build some momentum with his play, and everything, and realize, hey, I can still do these things at the college level that I was doing at the high school level. So even though it has been rocky, I think fans want to see a blowout win against the team that, you expect them to beat by 20 and everything. It may not happen this non-conference, but as long as Indiana continues to show signs of improvement or anything like that, it's going to be positive, especially going into Big Ten play. I don't know what to expect, them going against Maryland. I know Maryland's had their struggles a little bit, but, Indiana's got ready to play. They just got to be competitive and see what happens. But I think slowly right now they are putting the pieces together.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't looked pretty for most of the season. I think when you look at the team, the way they've played, it's been pretty disappointing. I mean, they've gotten results. If you told me at this point they were 5-1 and with the wins they had, I mean, they've won all the games they're supposed to win. They just haven't looked good doing it. And in college sports, that's part of it. You can't just win; you got to look good doing it. And the defense is still a huge concern. The rebounding looked a lot better the last couple games, but it's still, when they play Maryland, you play Big Ten opponents that are going to be a lot more physical. It's going to be big, especially Indiana has to win the glass. When you have a 7-footer, they have such a big lineup that they shouldn't ever lose the battle on the boards, or at least not lose it in the way they've been losing it, especially to smaller mid-major teams, which is just can't happen if Indiana is going to be successful this year. With Maryland, I mean, Kyle, you mentioned it. Maryland has been struggling. They had a lot of expectations, but it's still a very talented team that has it's a new look roster for them too. So what are your kind of takeaways? What does Indiana have to do to beat Maryland on Friday, Kyler?
I mean, obviously, I mentioned it a little bit in my little rant there, but I think first of all they got to come and be ready to compete. I think that's kind of been one of Indiana's struggles this year is that they have the slow starts. And that's kind of been like that for the past few years at times. They got to come out and they got to play hot. The crowd's going to be fired up to be there. Obviously, it's a Big Ten opponent, so it's going to be a massive, electric ovation there. But Indiana's, and you mentioned it too, they got to win the rebounding battle. I think Maryland's got some highly athletic guys. They've got also some size as well that's going to be competing. And they just got to be willing to rebound. Mike Woodson's talked about it. Just a lot of times, he's got to get his guards to, they got to be willing to rebound. They got to get in there. It can't just be Khalil. It just can't be Malik. McKenzie and Baco showed a little bit of rebounding as well. So those guys got to really be in there no matter on what end it is. And they just got to be willing to rebound. And then obviously you hope that you start seeing some improvements on the defensive end. Maryland's got some very talented guards on there that can make plays, especially from behind the arc. Indiana's got to be ready to communicate on that end, and they just got to be ready to compete on that end as well. So it definitely is an interesting time, for Indiana to have a Big Ten opponent. It's been kind of like this for the past couple of years, the way the Big Ten's doing it. Really don't know what to expect with Indiana going into Big Ten play this early, but as long as they're there and they're ready to compete and hopefully everything's clicking on the defensive end, I think they got a chance to win this one and, start off the season pretty good.
Yeah, and it's interesting because both of these teams, at least kind of stat wise through the first kind of 6-7 games here, are very similar. And I think if you looked at what what Maryland brought back from last year, obviously Jameer Young, Julian Reese, obviously have Dante Scott as well, and bring in a nice recruiting class. They should not be struggling as much as they have been. Obviously, we already talked about Indiana's struggle so far, at least throughout games, not so much on paper for the first 6 games. But Maryland is not a good shooting team, and they are shooting just about the same percent as Indiana is from three. They both not only don't attempt a lot of threes, but they don't make a lot of threes. And if you look at what is probably going to be the deciding factor in this game, it's probably going to be who can win that 3-point shooting battle. Both teams have physical front courts for the most part. Both teams have if Xavier Johnson plays, athletic guards in the backcourt as well. If Xavier Johnson's not able to play, that's going to be a major issue when defending Jameer Young and his ability to create off of the dribble, get into the paint, and create some potential open opportunities for some of these 3-point shooters that they do have, just haven't been able to convert early in the season here. But Maryland's a good rebounding team. They're a very physical team defensively. They take a lot of that personality from Kevin Willard, but they just are not doing as much, at least at an effective rate, in the half court, very similarly to Indiana that you would have expected coming into this year. So it's probably going to be a very interesting battle between that front court and Julian Reese and Dante Scott, and what Indiana can match with Khalil Ware and Malik Renew, and see if they're able to kind of take one of those guys out of the game early on, because Maryland does struggle without Julian Reese on the floor on both ends of the floor. And so if you're able to do that and kind of win that battle, I think that would offset a little bit of what Maryland's going to try to do, and that's attack Indiana's backcourt, especially if Xavier Johnson's not able to play.
Yeah, I mean, Jameer Young is really good, and Indiana is likely going to lose the 3-point battle. Like they have every game they've played this year. The team, it seems like an unwillingness to shoot the 3 ball. Woodson kind of talked about it, how they are working on it. He wants them to shoot the 3 ball, but he keeps kind of saying like it's not the most important thing. And while that is true, you got to shoot the 3 ball today's game. You can't like consistently make 3 threes in a game and expect to compete every single night. Indiana has to shoot the ball more from 3, and it starts with McBacco. I know Indiana hit 4 against Harvard, I believe, tied a season high, which 4 threes being a season high is ridiculous for a team. 4 threes should be a season high for a player, if maybe more. And McBacco, yeah, he had 2 called, 2 where he was on the line or something like that, where they were overturned, but still, Indiana needs to shoot the 3 ball more. It starts with McBacco, it starts with Trey Galloway. If Xavier Johnson's on the floor, and even CJ Gunn. CJ Gunn has really been working to the mid-range, and he just has not been really effective on the offensive end thus far. And he has all the tools to be a very good offensive player for Indiana, but he just hasn't put it together. And I think what Woodson needs to kind of start doing is like game planning, running plays to open up the shooters, open up plays for the shooters, get guys looks. With McBacco, the first or second possession of the game against Harvard, Indiana ran an action for him where he was coming off screens for a corner 3. It ended up being a 2, but it got him going early. If Indiana does that for CJ Gunn, Trey Galloway, and these other shooters, it could really help their confidence and help this team really improve from beyond the arc. I think so. Alec, what are you, when you're looking at Maryland, I guess you kind of mentioned it. It's Jameer Young is the guy. What is Indiana, I guess, got to do to take him away if Xavier Johnson doesn't go?
Yeah, I mean, they tried to do this a little bit last year as well, which is, get up, be very physical with him. He's obviously a very quick guard who can penetrate, really good first step, but you need to be physical with him. You need to be able to move him off of his spots. He's going to be a guy that obviously has the ball in his hands a lot. They have moved him a little bit more off the ball with Deshaun Harris-Smith, the freshman guard who Indiana fans obviously know a lot about, who's come in and really helped Maryland's ball handling ability and at least freedom for Jameer Young. But they need to move him off the 3-point line. He's shooting about 34, 35% from three this year. But a lot of those are going to be with him either coming off of screens with the ball in his hand, a high ball screen, or if you see him a couple dribble pull up off of the dribble there. But if they're able to push him off the 3-point line, and again, be very physical with him, I think that's going to go a long way in at least helping negate some of what he can bring to the floor. Again, I think Deshaun Harris-Smith is probably going to have a really good matchup with Trey Galloway. Pretty excited to watch both of them go at each other on both ends of the floor, both very physical, high motor kind of guys. I think this is a game that you need Trey Galloway to win that matchup, regardless of if Xavier Johnson's going to be on the floor. Because again, we kind of talked about, that point guard matchup potentially being, one-sided if Xavier Johnson is not able to go. And that front court, I really do think almost negates each other. So I think it does come down to that secondary ball handler, and that's Trey Galloway and Deshaun Harris-Smith. And it's a guy, again, a freshman, first Big Ten game, going up against a guy who's played a lot of basketball in his college career here with Trey Galloway, has not gotten off to a great start this year. They're going to need him in a big way. And so that's personally for me, the big matchup that I'm really looking at in this one. And that could end up deciding the game for whichever team ends up winning that one right there.
Yeah, and Alec, you mentioned if Xavier Johnson's not going to be playing in this game, you look at Trey Galloway. Trey Galloway absolutely has to step up. And it just watching him in the few games that we've seen this year, it just hasn't seemed like he's the old Trey Galloway that we kind of know. He's not that gritty. He's got some confidence issues, it looks like, for the most part. He's taking shots, but he's not taking enough shots, and you want him to take a little bit more of those shots. But I think when you look at that, the backcourt struggles of Indiana, it's kind of surprising because you got two seniors that have been around, especially in Mike Woodson's system for the past few years. I have experience, what it takes to be in the backcourt of a Mike Woodson system. Hard for me to say, but Trey Galloway's got to really step up for Indiana, especially with Xavier Johnson. If he's not going to play, we don't know at this time, but you really can't put the load on Gabe Cupps. You really can't put the load on Anthony Leal or CJ Gunn, the guys that get sparing minutes. You've got to look at Trey Galloway to step up and be that sort of gritty, that in-your-face guard, especially on the defensive end. Hopefully he continues to attack the basket. He's got to work on his finishing. I feel like he's missed a lot of bunnies, a lot of transition buckets and everything. So you really look at Trey Galloway to step up, in that area, especially against a backcourt like Maryland that's got some playmakers on that end.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really big about the Maryland game, it sets the tone for this 4-game stretch. This is a huge stretch in Indiana season. Last year we saw in December they went on had a huge skid, lost some Big Ten games, some non-conference games, and really the rest of the, I guess, winter and building into spring, they were trying to claw their way out of the hole they dug themselves. Indiana can't dig themselves another hole because they don't have a Trey Jackson Davis that can carry them out of it like they did last year. And when you look at the next schedule, it's Maryland on Friday, travel to Ann Arbor to take on Michigan on Tuesday, and then you go to Atlanta to play Auburn, and then you host Kansas a week later. It's 4 very tough games. And if Indiana can go 3-1 or even 2-2, you're probably thinking, okay, that's fine. Like, that's a good spot to be in. But if they go 1-3 or even 0-4, now this team is drowning and they need a lifeline to really pull themselves out. Kyler, what are you kind of looking for over this 4-game stretch?
Yeah, this is obviously the toughest stretch that Indiana's going to have, when it comes to this little area in the schedule, not counting the Big Ten, when they fully get back into that in the conference play. But, yeah, you're going to find out a lot about this Indiana team. You mentioned it, going 2-2, I think should be the bare minimum goal for this team. And it is very possible that they could go 1-3. It's even possible that they could go 0-4 because they're finally facing talent and they're not going to be able just to squeak by, the teams that they're supposed to be beating by 10 plus points, by double figures. They're going to have to really earn these games. And you look at that, they've got 2 road games, against a Michigan team, first of all, that's, has shown some positive things, but also is a team that's still trying to figure themselves out well. And then you have that neutral game in Atlanta against Auburn, who that's an SEC team that's a very highly athletic, great coach team that can obviously can beat you, and they will will compete. Very, very important. Indiana, I think for them to have positivity with the fan base moving into the rest of the calendar year onto the Big Ten play for the rest of the season, I think they really need to try to get at least 2 wins here to really just kind of get everybody back on track, take the stress away from the fan base, and then just continue to move forward and continue to improve. But it's going to be very interesting. And like I said earlier, you're going to find out what this Indiana team is during the stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the 4 opponents, right? There are 4 opponents that are expected, at least coming into the season, and how they've played throughout the course of the first couple of weeks here, to be NCAA tournament teams, right? I mean, obviously Maryland has gotten off to a rocky start, like we touched on, but coming into the season, and still at this point, right, they still have the talent that's expected to not only get to the NCAA tournament, but potentially win a couple games come March. The way Michigan's obviously started off, I think, has been a pleasant surprise to just about everyone, maybe outside of people in the program there. But the 2 big ones that everyone's obviously looking at are Auburn and Kansas, 2 really big non-conference matchups that could go either way at this point. With the struggles that Kansas has had throughout the course of these first few weeks, the lack of bench, the lack of shooting outside of Kevin McCullough, and obviously what they have in Hunter Dickinson is a big issue for them. And that one looks a lot more winnable, even with the struggles that Indiana's had, than it did just a week or 2 ago. Obviously, Auburn in Atlanta is going to be extremely difficult, regardless of kind of how Indiana does play in that one. Athletic guards have always hurt Indiana in Mike Woodson's 3 years here. Perimeter play, especially guarding on the perimeter, has been a major issue for a lot of Indiana's losses. And that's exactly what Auburn has, which is extremely versatile and athletic guards. So no matter kind of what you do in this 4-game stretch, I think you have to start it off with a win on Friday against Maryland. I think it was Drew said, right, that sets the tone for this upcoming stretch. And it certainly does. Because, again, if you're going to go in and drop your first Big Ten game at home, that's not a great sign for especially what was coming off of your best performance against Harvard. You want to start to build some momentum and move forward that way. But absolutely, brutal 4-game stretch here. And I think you're going to learn a lot about this team very, very quickly, kind of what the expectation should be moving into full Big Ten play come end of December 16th, I think, when that Kansas game is.
Yeah, and I think like the other thing that's kind of been it's November right now. These games are early December games. It's not something to really be thinking about, but the resume games. I mean, you beat Auburn, you beat a Kansas. Come March, if Indiana's on the bubble or borderline a tournament team, like win over Kansas is a win that gets you in the tournament. A win against Auburn in Atlanta is a win that could be the difference between you making the tournament or not. And these are games that, like, right now, yeah, you're not really thinking about the tournament per se, but they matter. I mean, these games count just as much. So it's going to be really – I mean, Indiana is going to have to play well. If they play like they've, I guess, played the first 4 games of the season, they might go 0-4 in this stretch. But if they kind of build off what we saw in the second half of the Harvard game, who knows? They could go 3-1 and surprise a lot of people and end up where a lot of people projected this team at the start of the year, but just hasn't been. And I guess with Maryland, I can't believe I didn't even bring it up yet, but it's also a return game for former Indiana forward Jordan Geronimo, who transferred to Maryland over the offseason. Alec, kind of what are you expecting, or your thoughts on Geronimo coming back?
Yeah, I mean, a guy who I think a lot of fans were, really excited about when he got to IU, a guy who just never really grew into the athletic body that he had, and just kind of was a little bit out of position for what Mike Woodson was really looking for consistently off the bench. But it should be fun to see him back. He's having a really good start to the season for Maryland there at that kind of small ball hybrid forward position. Doing a lot of really good things for them, being a high energy guy, right? I mean, I think a lot of the fans are still going to love seeing him Just hoping that he, doesn't throw a big one down on him on a fast break or anything like that a lot of Indiana fans are used to seeing on the opposite side of the spectrum. But should be fun to see him, and again, hope he plays well like he has been playing, because just obviously a really good guy, and still has a pretty bright future when it comes to what that potential really does potentially look like.
Yeah, just a guy that, an athletic body that just never grew into being a basketball player. And I think that was the main thing with him. And obviously he spent, was it 3 years with Indiana? I think he was there with Archie Miller his last year. Obviously he was an Archie recruit, and, Mike Woodson saw a lot of good things in Geronimo, saw a lot of potential with him. You can't teach his athleticism. You couldn't teach his energy. He just had that. He always had that. And whether, there were times where he just wasn't developed enough, as a basketball mind. He showed some bright spots, and he showed some improvements in his game. And I think obviously moving on from Indiana, going to Maryland was probably the best thing for him, as far as his development and just, getting a fresh start somewhere else. But I do think it will be fun to see him back into Assembly Hall. Obviously he's not an IU legend or anything, but I think a lot of the fans really respect what Geronimo brought. You never heard anything bad about him, and he was just always a really, really good teammate. So I think it will be a little mixed reaction when you do see his name called in Assembly Hall, but I think, obviously after tip off, you are an enemy now. So, it'll be fun. I'm curious to see if Mike Woodson reacts with him or anything like that in the game, after the game, in the handshake line or whatever. But, it'll be good to see Geronimo. And me personally, I'm happy for him to have this fresh start with Maryland.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see what the fan reaction is when he gets introduced at the start of the game. I'm really curious to see, the fans' reception of him. I mean, I expect it to be kind of probably a little neutral, positive. Probably not gonna boo the guy, but it'll definitely be interesting to see, because he, like you said, he's not a legend at IU by any means, but he was also like a really well liked guy in the program and really respected, even if he didn't perform how a lot of people hoped he would. I don't have anything else, guys. You got anything else before we wrap up? I mean, anything you want to, final thoughts, anything you want to add before we close out? All right. Guess not. So as
we're all
always,
quiet here.
Really quiet. Yeah. I feel like I'm just talking to myself, but as
Dead
always,
air,
for all
dead
things,
air on the podcast.
yeah, great podcasting being done by us right now. For all things, as always, for all things IU athletics, follow Indiana_FRN on Twitter, Facebook, and check out the HoosierIllustrated.com website, and make sure to hit subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. Thank you for listening to the Talkin Bout the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. We'll be back next week.